Hey reader, welcome back to the channel. This is Centaur here, and today we are looking at the unit review for the open beta version of the Terran Marine. This is the lowly foot soldier, originally prison conscripts sent over into the Caprulu sector. Now probably just a job, to be completely honest, right? Like you probably have people who sign up and become Marines who are not in fact prisoners. Tychus Finlay obviously is, but I'm sure there are plenty of others. Jim Raynor, who is not. But yeah, this is kind of your baseline warrior for the Terran faction in StarCraft. It's been a crowd favorite in StarCraft 1, StarCraft 2. And so the question that we're trying to resolve here as we prepare for the release of the rules at the beginning of the game, the release of the models that we're all very excited about, is this guy going to be worth it, right? Like, should we be buying tons and tons of this lowly dude to fill out our armies? Or can you get away with just one or two token units of them and really put your points into Goliaths and tanks and things like that? And so as we look at it, we're going to look at it from a stats and a rules perspective. We're going to look at offensive and defensive abilities, and then we're going to figure out, like, is it actually filling a useful role, right? Like, do you actually need these in your force? And that one might surprise you. Okay, more on that in a little bit. But just suffice it to say, it is actually a legitimate question, especially in an army like the Terrans, which are overwhelmingly a sit back and shoot things with various forms of guns and cannons, right? Like, do you actually need Marines in order to do that job? We're then going to figure out, does it line up with how they play in the RTS game? Because if they're not giving us the same thematic feel as we get in the RTS game, then maybe that's a sign that they need to be reworked. And then finally asking the question, should you buy it? And as we've been doing with all of these, by the way, again, none of the stuff we're going to be talking about in this series comes from the open beta, so none of this is spoiling anything for any of you who are waiting to jump in. Just a lot of fun thinking about what the options are from what we already know from publicly available images that have been spoiled for us online. And so taking a look at the Lowly Marine, this is the most recent work in progress version that we've seen. And there's a couple things we noticed. First of all, with a speed of 4, though that speed of 4 can be augmented with Stimpack, which we'll talk about in a little bit. It means that, they're reasonably fast, right? Lead model moves 4 inches, everybody else finishes within 2 inches of him, so you could have models moving as far as 6 inches forward if you really needed to. But just in general, yeah, it's fine. It seems a little bit slower than some of the other units that we've seen, but it's perfectly serviceable, perfectly reasonable. It's on par with the Roach, which we looked at last time, so that's not bad. It's got a 5+ evade save and a 5+ armor save. The evade save it does get to use with things like, say, the combat shield, which is nice, is one of the upgrades. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The armor 5+ means, it's fine, right? You're going to block about a third of the wounds that are coming into you, possibly with about a third of the ones before that being blocked out by an evade save. Means you are still going to be pretty squishy and you can suffer damage. But in general, it's a good baseline, right? You can block quite a bit. It's not the greatest save, but it's not horrible. And with 2 hit points each, it means that a unit can suffer a wound and not just die immediately, right? Which is nice. And since you're going to have, and you can see those in the bands over there to the right, anywhere from, you're going to buy the unit as either a 6-man unit, and then it gets worked down all the way down to 0, obviously. Or you can buy it bigger and you can get it as a 9-man unit. That means, you'll have 12 to 18 wounds to play with, which is a relatively large number, right? As you start suffering them, you're eventually going to start losing your volume of fire, which is where the problems are going to kick in. And eventually you're not even going to count towards supply for the purposes of controlling objectives, disengaging from people, etc., which could also be really bad. And so, because we'll talk about that in the combat phase a little bit later. But just suffice it to say, from a stat line, this feels right. Right, from somebody who's played a lot of Marines in StarCraft 1, even more Marines in StarCraft 2, because I'm not gonna lie, I don't ladder very often because I'm busy and I don't have time to just sit down and play a bunch of games with people and stuff like that. But I play the campaign quite a bit. I've probably played the Wings of Liberty campaign over 20 times, probably. Honestly, this feels about correct to what I'm used to. And then, of course, we get Stimpack. Stimpack is awesome. We all love Stimpack. It's an active ability, so you pop it in the movement phase. It costs you 1 CP, so this is going to be our Terran consumable resource management side of things that we got to manage while we're playing the game, where you can suffer 3 wounds that don't kill a model against the unit, which means, I suppose, if you only have 2 guys in the unit who have 2 wounds remaining, it could end up being non-lethal too, because it won't give you that third one on account of you didn't have another one to lose. Now, it means every single person in your unit is down to 1 wound, so any wound you suffer is going to lose you a guy. That's probably not great, okay? But hypothetically, it may not even be 3 wounds being dealt to the unit. Hypothetically, okay? And in exchange, you get a buff speed 2, which means you increase your speed from 4 to 6 for the turn. And the C-14 rifle. Note, this is, as far as I can tell, maybe not the AG-12, certainly not the grenade launcher, and not your melee strikes. That's important. Gains precision 3. Now, we haven't seen what the precision 3 rule is, but based on what we know from Eschenspiel and what the stim pack used to be, which was just re-rolling all failed hit rolls, I'm going to guess that precision 3 means your shots are more precise. Big surprise, right, Centaur? Big surprise. Which just means you're going to re-roll up to 3 failed hits. On this version. So this is a step down from what the stim pack used to be, especially since it used to be all failed hit rolls, which would probably have included melee attacks. But in this case, it's just the C-14 rifle, so it's just going to be your ranged attacks. Okay, and when we look at the assault phase, we jump into range attacks. You can see the C-14 and the AG rifle and the grenade launcher. We'll go into those into more depth when we look at the offensive abilities. Critical thing to note here when we compare this to the Eschenspiel card is that while the rate of attacks has remained the same at 2 for the normal rifle, 3 for the AG-12, and 4 for the grenade launcher, the hit difficulty is on a 3+, whereas it used to be on a 4+. And furthermore, with the grenade launcher, it used to have a rate of attacks of D6, which I'm not personally a big fan of. I don't like it when things are that swingy, where it could be 1 dice, it could be 6 dice. Having a rate of attacks of 4 makes me feel like this is a good upgrade to give a unit. And personally, if I'm buying the unit, I'm probably putting the grenade launcher on the guy who has the AG-12, because if I have to attack a light unit, I want the dice from that model to be able to help with surging. And it only surges against light, whereas the AG-12 only surges against armored. So I would put those two on the same guy. There is a drawback potentially to this. As far as we can tell, when wounds come in, you probably get to choose where they go as the person defending and suffering the wounds, like in most games. However, keep in mind, StarCraft is a game that has sniping abilities from things like ghosts, for example. While we don't have ghosts yet, we are getting a wave of psionic characters relatively soon, which makes me think for the Terrans that's gonna be the ghost, okay? So just keep in mind that if you put all your eggs in one Marine, just be careful. That's all I'm saying about that part. Maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's a bad idea. When we start playing, we'll see. We'll soon find out. But you'll notice they got that range of 12. All of their weapons have a long range of 18, so you can use this for a pretty good long range fire, and that maintains itself. Keep in mind that with the specialist rule, the AG-12 and the grenade launcher can only be on 1 guy in each squad because they're specialist weapons, okay? The grenade launcher also has sidearm, which means it's not replacing the normal rifle, so you'll have the choice between normal rifle or grenade launcher when you're shooting, which is kind of nice, okay? You can see shield. Shield is changed from the previous card, so now it's an upgrade, whereas a reaction in the assault phase, not in the combat phase, in the assault phase, you can pay 1 CP to give yourself an evade check. Now, as far as I can see, making that evade roll and then your armor roll is going to help you to stay alive. Depending on how you do the math, a 5+ followed by a 5+ is kind of similar to just rolling a 4+, which is not bad. However, keep in mind, I think, if I'm reading this correctly, it's when you are preparing to perform an armor roll, which means every single time you would want to use the shield ability in a single phase. If multiple units start to shoot at you, you might have to spend 1 CP and a reaction every single time, and you might have a limit on how many reactions you can perform. So may I recommend, as somebody who, again, is waiting for open beta and very excited to test this out, my gut instinct is if a single roach is shooting at you with just 4 attacks, you might not want to react and use the shield. You might want to conserve that resource and save it for something with a larger volume of fire. Okay, just a thing to think about as you're thinking things through. The slug thrower upgrade makes it so that, and this is passive, you don't have to spend resources, you get this all the time, which is nice. While you have a range of 12 and a long range of 18 inches, with the C-14 rifle, if they're within 6 inches, you do get anti-evade 1, which means for all the hits that you do to them, one of them is going to bypass evade saves. Because you're that close, it's a big thing, it's, the big slug is going in, it's a little bit harder to dodge at that close of a distance because it's moving so fast. Which is nice, because it means it's going straight to armor, Depending on the targets that you're shooting at, especially if you are able to surge and attack a light unit, that could be really nice as well. So because of that, this is a useful one. Arguably, this is probably the best, actually, out of all of the upgrades, to be completely honest. And then your grenades with the frag ability just makes it so that when, Zerglings run into you with an impact hits of 1, Roaches run into you with an impact hits of 2, you're minusing 1 from whatever those are. Now, I anticipate Zealots will probably have higher than an impact hits of 1. I can very easily see them having impact hits of 2, maybe even more than that. We'll have to see as to how that works out. This is nice because it means Zerglings are going to do no impact hits to you probably, which is great. Roaches will only do 1 instead of 2. All of that's excellent, but there are a decent number of builds that your frag grenades may not come up at all, right? Because if you're a guy like me and you like doing a roach rush, for example, and that's how you're planning on running Zerg, or you like running Stalkers like I do when it comes to running Protoss or Dragoons, I'm more of a Dragoons guy. I just didn't get to run them very much in StarCraft 2 in general, just because, again, you don't really get Dragoons until Legacy of the Void, and that's even a choice as to whether you want that or not, right? So toward that end, the bigger issue is if people aren't actually charging you, you're not going to use this upgrade. Doesn't necessarily make it bad. It just means you might find that your mileage varies on how much that one's worth. And then finally, when you go into the combat phase, you've got, normally it's just 1 attack with a 5+ doing 1 damage. If you upgrade them, you do get the bayonet, and so you'll get 2 attacks at a 5+ with the ability to surge against light for D3, which is not bad. All you need to know is this is also not very good, okay? Quite clearly, you would really prefer not to be in close combat with these guys if you possibly can avoid it, okay? So just things to keep in mind. And when we look at the Eschenspiel card, kind of in preparation for all of this, we see a couple of things have changed. Not so much in the combat section. Most of the changes seem to have occurred with how Stimpak works, where we're now not re-rolling all of our failed hits. It's just 3, and just with the ranged attacks. The shield has gone to a 5+ evade save as a reaction, spending a resource, instead of a passive improvement to a 4+ armor save, which again is kind of the same from a math perspective, except you got to now manage a resource, so it makes it kind of a more strategic thing, a more tactical thing, which I like. I think that's really good for games. Otherwise, everything has basically remained the same. Slug Thrower has gone to an anti-evade 1 instead of 2, so maybe people found we were slipping some wounds in a little too easily with the Slug Thrower ability. We've also found that the blast keyword is not there anymore on the grenade launcher. This doesn't necessarily mean that blast will not exist. I could see the siege tank being very different, for example, from the grenade launcher, and where a blast keyword would be quite effective there. Similarly for banelings, I could see that being a very nice use for blast. Maybe they just didn't feel like they needed it for the grenade launcher, which is fine. Or it could be that blast was just too complicated, and then they said, hey, there's an easier way to do this. Let's streamline it, right? Which is also fine. So we'll see how that ends up working out. But when we look at them offensively, I think the thing we obviously need to talk about first is Stimpak. Not only does it give you an extra 2 inches, which is nice for maintaining distance away from units or moving into distance toward units that you want to be able to shoot at, which is good. Precision 3 allowing you to reroll 3 fails is really good, especially since now that you're on a 3+ to hit instead of a 4+ to hit that we had on the Eschenspiel version of the C14 rifle, because as you'll notice, 4+ to hit on the Eschenspiel version instead of a 3+. My guess is that the Stimpak change and the hit change happened at the same time. And what probably happened was they said, okay, 4+ to hit is not very reliable. It's very swingy. It's just the nature of D6 games. So we're going to give you the ability to reroll all fails, and that's going to make it a lot better. And my guess is it was still really swingy. Either people were not using the benefit of Stimpak on a turn when they gave themselves wounds because they just rolled out of the box, or they rolled really poorly, they re-rolled, they rolled mediocre, and so it basically came out to a wash, and so again, it was wounds without purpose, or it was on the opposite side where they rolled pretty okay, and then they picked it up and they rolled crazy, and so the Marine unit was doing way more damage. And so a 4+ with all fails re-rolled was just too swingy. And my guess is they made it, okay, well, let's make it a 3+ so it's at least reliable. We don't want people leaving all of our Marines at home because that doesn't feel like StarCraft. But we're going to make it so you're re-rolling like 3 instead of effectively re-rolling between 5 and 7, depending on how you want to run the math and how many people you have in the unit. And I think that's a healthy change, but I think it does mean Stimpak is one of the things you're going to have to resource manage and determine how effective and how necessary it's going to be, and that's going to determine a lot of your offensive capability on any given turn. In terms of the assault phase, I mean, again, you're looking at somewhere between 2 to 18 shots from the C14 rifles. You might lose some of those if you take the AG-12, but then you might also increase because it has one more shot than your average C-14 rifle. Range is fine, damage output's fine, all that looks good. The grenade launcher is, again, kind of a nice way to be able to get a large volume of attacks in case you want it on something, right? I mean, again, we talked about how it might be useful to put it on the guy with the AG-12 so that your whole unit can surge against stuff. I don't know if you necessarily need that. I feel like the grenade launcher could also just be really nice on a random dude with a C-14 because you're like, well, I think for this turn, I think I want to upgrade my guy from 2 shots to 4 shots and then have another guy upgraded from 2 shots to 3 shots, right? So, it all depends on how much you care about volume, but it means you could potentially have a volume of upwards of 20 coming out of these guys, which is great. So we'll see how that ends up working out, practically speaking. And of course, the ability to reduce the impact hits by -1 means hopefully in the assault phase, offensively, you're able to keep more of your attacks on the table, right? Because your opponent's doing less wounds to you. Your combat phase, honestly, is pretty poor. I'm not going to say this is the worst ever that we're going to see in the game because we haven't seen Infested Terran yet. But I will say this. I think this is pretty bad. I think this is pretty bad even by comparison to Zerglings. Definitely going to be pretty bad by comparison to Zealots. And so you're going to want to avoid close combat as much as possible. Okay, I think this is a good base for range damage. I think if they get into you in close combat, you could actually be in a lot of trouble with these guys, so do be very careful with that. On that point, defensively, in the movement phase, hey, at least you're faster, right? If you need to avoid enemies, this is a great way to do it. If you need to do a strategic withdrawal, you can do that in order to get away from people, which is nice. But it also makes you more vulnerable, right? Because you're suffering up to 3 non-lethal wounds on yourself in order to get the bonus of the extra +2 inches worth of speed and getting the potential rerolls for your ranged attacks in the assault phase. Toward that end, one thing that might be useful, obviously with the understanding that you might have medics healing during this movement phase and stuff like that, ending the movement phase early, if you run a lot of Marines, might be a really good idea. Because the first player to pass in a given phase gets to go first in the subsequent phase. So if you want to be able to shoot first and take advantage of doing volume, removing enemies before they get a chance to shoot at you, since you've got all these wounds on you, it might be advantageous to, like, stim 3 units of Marines and then pass and just say, for this turn, we don't have to move with any of our other units. We're feeling fine with all of it. We just want to make sure we go first. And so while they're maneuvering to get in a position to make charges against us with Zerglings, or they're maneuvering in a position to charge us with Zealots, or they're maneuvering Stalkers in a position to shoot at us, or whatever may happen, it might be advantageous to just end the phase early to be like, well, you might rack one of my units over the coals because of all the wounds I put on them. But I'm going to shoot first. And I might remove the volume of what you can do to me by virtue of getting to be the first guy to draw blood in the assault phase, right? In the assault phase, you can upgrade to combat shield, which gives that extra 5+ evade. Again, it all depends on how you want to manage your points and whether or not you want to give the, every single unit the upgrade to have combat shields. That is a legitimate question, I think. I don't think it's necessarily an auto-include because, again, resource management, right? How many resources you might be throwing away into making evade saves? That might not work, right? I mean, a 5+ save is not bad, but it's not a guarantee it's going to block stuff. So make a judgment call, right, as to how much you need that. And then, of course, Stimpack is going to make you a little more reliable in the assault phase. So if you really feel like you need to be shooting in a given turn, Stim might be a good idea. From a combat phase perspective, this is really bad. In general, you want to avoid this. You're really vulnerable. There's no benefit from Stimpack. You are not going to be doing a lot of damage, especially because, again, you don't have any surge. So, if they're rolling to armor and their armor, especially if their armor is pretty good, like, you could find you're not doing very much to enemies at all in this one. Honestly, I think the best thing to remember about these guys is, and this is consistent with StarCraft 1 and 2, the RTS games, their strength in numbers, right? As long as you have large bulk numbers of these guys, I think they're going to do great. The moment they start falling down and you don't have a lot of Marines, you better send some help over there really fast because otherwise they are going to evaporate and very quickly. So what role are they going to fill? They are going to be supporting fire on a budget. Right. I mean, if some of the, obviously we don't know points values yet, but assuming that they're going to be on the cheaper end of units you can buy per body, for the number of bodies you can buy, they're going to be pretty good supporting fire, right? Each of them is getting 2 shots base on a 3+ to hit, which is really, really good. Okay. They have anti-air and anti-ground capabilities, which right now is not a really big deal because the only flying unit we have is like Rainer's defense drone. But I mean, we're expecting waves, and I anticipate those waves are going to be something to the tune of probably Vikings, possibly Banshees, probably not Wraiths for the Terrans as the first wave of flyers. I would assume that we're probably going to see Mutalisks for the Zerg. They do have other flying units, but I just feel like that's probably the number one they're going to give us. Protoss, I'm not entirely sure. I could see it being something like the Scout or the Oracle or the Phoenix. The Phoenix, of course, the biggest problem is how do you do the whole bubble raising thing and how does that work, practically speaking? For ground units, it is a really effective anti-air unit, but it's also only an anti-air unit. So, do you want to kind of trait somebody and, kind of slot somebody in, or do you want to save only anti-air like the Corruptor and the Phoenix and such for maybe a second wave of flyers? Since most of the models we're going to be owning and probably most of what people are going to be fielding is going to be ground units. I'm not entirely sure, but that would be my guess. Is what we're looking at is that they are going to be. This is going to make a difference as we go along, and that's good because it means that Marines are going to stay relevant for a longer period of time. Because it's the kind of thing where, for again, a relatively cheap way of fielding large amounts of volume, you can get reasonable anti-air defense. It's also, I think, just going to be a way to hold the line alongside mechanical and more powerful units, right? I mean, like, I've been kind of hammering on the fact that Marines are not very good in the combat phase. The thing is, I suspect siege tanks are going to be even worse in the combat phase because they probably won't have a combat phase attack option at all. So what you want these guys for is you want them forming the nice thin blue, red, green, whatever line, color you color them, line in front of your siege tanks, in front of your Goliaths, in front of all of your other supporting units, in front of your medics, right? I mean, we'll be looking at the Marauder soon. The Marauder technically is better in close combat, but that's only because they have less models. So if they didn't have, if they had as many models as the Marines, we probably would find that the Marines would either be better or the Marauder would be worse. The only reason why they are the way they are is because you aren't actually rolling very many because there aren't very many people to take advantage of the dice, right? 2 attacks on a 5+ is not great chances to hit, but if you have 9 men, that's 6 hits, which is not horrible. It's not as good as Zerglings, more on that very soon, okay? But suffice it to say, it might be better than the alternative, right? And this brings us into kind of like, what role does it fill? I think there is going to be a reasonable question and something that Archon's going to have to make sure they're watching as they're going through with new releases, is that right now they work because they're good supporting fire on a budget, but they're in an army that overwhelmingly does supporting fire, right? I mean, the only unit you really want kind of getting close to the enemy is fire bats, to some extent Hellions, and hellbats, right? Like that's the only things in a I guess it depends on how they end up doing psionics, right? Because like depending on how they do specters, I could see specters also being something that might want to get in really close. But in general, not really, right? I mean, the overwhelming majority of Terran units would prefer to be fighting at a distance. So in this sense, I think one of the places where they currently fill a role is that, well, if I have to throw somebody into the fight and I have to have somebody keep people back and away from my other units, these guys at least have a decent amount of bodies, which gives them a reasonable amount of volume, and thus they might stand a chance to live a little bit longer. Okay, we'll have to see, but I think that might be where, I don't want to say Marines are ever going to completely go out of use, but we run the risk, because they're in a supporting fire faction, that we might find that there are other things that just prove to be better in the long run to use. So just keep that in mind, okay? And does this match the computer game? Honestly, I think pretty well. My result is, yeah, I think it does. Because it's supporting fire with the gambit ability of Stim Pack. Because on the one hand, yes, you're improving your volume, but at the same time, and this is a whole thing in StarCraft 2, if you time the stim wrong, and your medivacs or your medics, depending on whether you're playing in the latter games or whether you're playing in the campaign, because you don't get access to medics, obviously, most unfortunately in the campaign in latter games. If you time it wrong, you could end up losing a lot of people and not actually doing a whole lot of damage to the enemy because you did so many wounds to yourself in the process. And the result is, I suspect, this is going to come out really well in this game, right? Do you need to stim on a given turn? Are your medics close enough to take care of this unit? Did this unit have to go off and do far away duty so they are not near the medics, so maybe you have to play a little more conservative with them? Hopefully they took the combat shield, right? Things like that. That's a legitimate question. right? Because Stimpack is not an upgrade. It is standard, stock standard on all of the Marines. So it's always going to be a question. And the question is going to be, when do you pop it? And I think that's a very healthy question that keeps it from being a non-tactical asset. It makes it very dynamic, something you're going to have to be constantly evaluating, and I think that's healthy. It has very similar features, right? Combat Shield obviously is a little bit different. It's not a straight HP boost like it is in the game. That being said, I feel like since it's not a massive HP boost, and this unit is already a 2-wound unit, I don't have a problem with it not augmenting the armor save or not adding an extra wound. I think the evade, giving you the evade save, I think is fine. It's arguably better than just a straight armor upgrade, just because again, like it forces a question like, how often do you want to use it? I think it makes it more interesting and more dynamic and more tactical. But I think I'm fine with it. I would be okay with it either way. And then finally, effective in large numbers, right? I mean, that is exactly how you're supposed to use Marines. In an ideal world, the most effective groups of Marines are like 40 Marines. And hypothetically, depending on how cheap these guys are and what points level you're playing at, you might be able to run 40 Marines, maybe even more. And that could be really, really fun to do for some people. And then finally, I mean, I'll be honest, I feel like the Marine is kind of one of those S tier sort of units in StarCraft 1 and StarCraft 2, especially because of how bad the pathing is in StarCraft 1. And so, in some respects, maybe it's even a little less broken than it is in StarCraft 1 and StarCraft 2, because you do end up getting, again, there's a very clear weakness, which is you get them in close combat, and now you're going to maul them, right? They're not going to do much back to you as you're mauling them to pieces. And so, because of that, I feel like it might actually be an improvement on the RTS game in some respects, because Marine Horde could be really oppressive. Maybe there will be a reason to run battle cruisers in the tabletop game. I'm not saying we're going to get battle cruisers because, again, just scale, right? Size is just going to be so big. But currently, there's not a whole lot of reason to go with battle cruiser in the RTS game over guy with gun, okay? Guy with gun is really good, okay? And I feel like this guy is really good, but maybe not quite so overpowered and so S tier and so auto-include that one will simply pass over other options. And I think that is very, very healthy. And so, should you buy these guys? Yes. In fact, I'm going to go as far as to say you should buy a lot of them, okay? Both because Archon seems to be doing a pretty good job of trying to take care of the franchise. We want to help them out. We want to show Blizzard Entertainment that Archon's doing a good job so that nobody's license get yanked, so we can continue getting cool models, so we can feed our addiction for plastic crack, okay? But also because, like, they're very thematic, right? Like, this feels good to run these guys. They're very effective, so you're not feeling like you're hamstringing yourself for feels and for vibes. The barracks is going to be a good help, though I'm not sure it's strictly necessary, right? Again, there are questions on how often you're going to use frag grenades. There are questions on how often you want to use combat shields. Slug thrower is nice to always have, but again, like, how many enemies are going to end within 6 inches of you without then also charging? There's legitimate questions of that, especially in case creep ends up boosting people's speed and things like that, which kind of seems to be hinted at from some of the stuff we've seen about queens. So, like, I think there's a legitimate question, how often is slug thrower going to actually be used? So you may not necessarily need a barracks for every single one. You might be able to get away with a 3 racks build instead of going with a 6 or 8 racks build, which is really nice because, again, who knows how many extra, special points, Vespine gas points you're going to have to buy those upgrades. It's a core unit, so if you want to just do Marine Rush, I think you probably could. You could probably do an entire army that's 100% Marines. In fact, from what it sounds like you're not even required to take a hero. So you might literally be able to go 100% Marine. I would personally add some medics, because I feel like if you're going to stim, I feel like it might be a good idea to at least have an option, some sort of a drop back option to help handle you in case things get really bad. But yeah, I mean, I think this could be very interesting to see people just trying out 100% Marines and just see how it goes. It also obviously comes in the starter set, so it's going to be very easy to acquire. But also, just like, I mean, look at them, right? Like, the models look really good. A lot of different kinds of poses, a lot of interesting things, doodads, extra add-ons. You better believe when I buy my Zerg units, if there are any extra bits lying around, because obviously, like, there's different types of slasher talons and stuff like that for Zerglings, I'm going to buy a couple extra packs of Terran Marines just to convert into infested Terran. We don't even have a profile for those yet, but I know I'm going to try them because they seem really cool, and I think they could be really great. And I'm just going to see what happens, and I will do a video showing you how I did the mock-up, so if you want to try it, you can do those as well. Because as much as I love having thousands of things in my bit box, it is really fun when you get to use them up. And so in general, I like the Marine. I think this is good game design. No notes. in terms of negatives so far. Obviously, once we get into testing, we'll see what ends up happening. I feel like a lot of people have tested out the Marines. We've seen a lot of already reasonable common sense adjustments to the Marines that are going to make them very playable, but very fair. And I think that's a very healthy thing to see even before we go into open beta. But what do you think? Do you think that the 3+ to hit is just too high on a unit that is so basic as the Marine that we should see a little more of a scale coming out of Marines here? Do you think that the fact that Stimpack is now only re-rolling 3 dice instead of all of your fails means that it might not be worth suffering 3 wounds in order to get that benefit? Let us know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.